In the history of storytelling, the bad guy always arrives as a fully formed and relentless force of evil, unhesitatingly determined to wreak chaos and destruction. Their stubbornness and certainty in their actions often leaves us, the audience, to assume that their upbringing was a unique and hence interesting one. And often it is. We are rewarded with a well thought out sequence of events that the writer has constructed in order to draw us in and point us to possible answers about why the villain became who he is. But what happens if there is no backstory? What happens if the antagonist became without the process of becoming? What if the villain is born fully formed as a king and had his subordinates bowing down from the minute he stepped into this world? How would one come to understand the world if their power is bestowed rather than earned? To answer these questions, you'd have to look no further than Yoshihiro Togashi's character of Meruem from Hunter x Hunter. Meruem was born a king, but to the Chimera ants, the position of king is not given to just anyone. It's mentioned that their king is a completely different organism to the rest of the species. As we saw in the series, all the ants born first were employed as foot soldiers to harvest food for the queen. Meruem was the pinnacle of this system, and hence was born stronger, smarter, and more powerful than his species. His throne was a result of who he is, rather than the circumstances that he was born into. When Meruem and the 3 royal guards infiltrate the palace of the current supreme leader, their confusion at why this man stands at the top of the human world becomes obvious. Meruem, who was able to sense Nen, which is the main spiritual energy of Hunter x Hunter, used this to tell which humans were better than the others. This is an indicator of their physical strength, and of course to the Chimera ants, that is the main power that distinguishes the king from the others. Of course, in our human world, this is definitely not the only way we assign value to people. Our world is much more complex, and Meruem working through this reality forms an instrumental part of his development, which we'll get into in a bit. Of course, our hierarchy systems are also imperfect and are not necessarily logical. Meruem, sensing that the leader of the human world had no Nen, leads him to mumbling worthless under his breath when he first inspects him. Again, this one word gives us a hint into how he views the world. He is the king because he is the strongest and most powerful. The king should be the person who is the most capable, because that arms them with the tools to wield their power appropriately. Hence, you don't simply claim or choose the throne chooses you, because you are the one most worthy of it. This is logic, but as we know, our world doesn't necessarily operate on logic. Togashi constructs these creatures, the Chimera ants, as intelligent visitors to our human world, who have no previous experiences of living, to draw attention to the unlimited contradictions we have in our world that we don't even consider while living. Through these characters, Togashi again is able to re-explore the concepts of good and evil, which he has done so brilliantly throughout, which you will know if you go to my channel and watch my other videos on this series. Meruem then asks the question, why does that scum claim to be king? Poof responds, in the human world it is a common phenomenon. Humans without intelligence or talent end up in positions of power due to bloodline or connections. Meruem is disgusted by this, and his response points us to the fact that he was born with an inherent wisdom that defies all logic. In the hands of an incompetent, power brings nothing but ruin. We can come to the conclusion that Meruem is a character who was born with strength, power, intelligence and wisdom, a true king. But he lacks only one thing, life, or rather what it means to live in a world where power and strength aren't the only defining forces. But right now in the story, I think his disgust at the positions of power being filled by those unworthy is justified, and possibly points to a flaw in our systems, in our flawed world. Togashi then takes us through an arc that at first glance seems trivial, but as we know in reality, becomes an instrumental part in his exploration of the character of Meruem. In his newly taken palace, he sits and spends his time amusing himself with board games. Also, Meruem taking the palace indicates that his beliefs were correct. In the Hunter x Hunter world, he is extremely overpowered, with the Chimera ants breaking the power scaling in every way when they were first introduced. But that is the whole point of the character. He was born to stand at the top of the world because he wields the power of brute force, and when everything boils down to it, brute force is the ultimate power. The one who is the strongest will always impose their will. As shown by his taking over of the castle, no one is able to stand in his way, as they can be easily dealt with. Meruem tests his beliefs in the world and finds out that he is right. He is the ultimate king. In regards to the board games, Meruem plays these games to pass the time. However, what is a common tie of all these games? What is the main objective of all these games? Essentially, they are all games where the main objective is to trap the king. They're essentially games where you wield equal power and whoever wields it better is the victor. I believe the reason Meruem took such an interest to these games is because it allowed him to explore what it means to be a king in a way that is separate to himself. If he restricts himself from using his superior physical power, is he still able to differentiate himself as a king? Are there any components to being a king that he's overlooking since his strength is so great? This is where the introduction of another fascinating character comes in. The world champion at the game of gungi, Komugi, a weak, fragile and blind girl who had devoted her life to this game. Meruem had met his match. He easily decimated the world champions of chess, go and shogi, but after attempt upon attempt, he couldn't get the better of this blind girl. Komugi was a very gentle girl, however she is a direct contradiction to the king. A physically disabled girl who comes from a poor family and is extremely self-deprecating. No trace of ego was present in this girl. This is a beautifully constructed character to challenge Meruem. We've got a worthy king whose ego was limitless in the face of the peasant, whose sense of self was so non-existent that she promised to take her life if she ever lost a single game of gungi, as this was the way she made a humble living for her family, stating that if she loses this, she'd be nothing but a burden. So it's a clash of ultimate ego with no ego, but there's an interesting twist. Both characters' egos are in line with who they are. Their self-image is a reflection of reality. Neither one is pumping themselves up or down. They are simply acting in accordance to who they think they are. And when Meruem finds that he cannot beat this girl, he starts to question himself. You'd expect that he would be infuriated by this humiliation. How is a king being outdone by a lowly peasant? And Meruem also thought he'd feel like that as well. However, he realizes that he doesn't. He is enjoying their games and the challenge. He mentions that all his moves are dictated by the board when he is playing her, indicating that she is still several levels above him. He feels confused at how he is not feeling damaged or wounded by this insult to his status. This is where the first contradiction between his knowledge and feelings at the situation occur. He doesn't understand why he feels the way he does, and therefore awakens to the fact that he doesn't truly understand himself, and there may be something to life missing. Essentially, when the way he felt no longer coincided with logic, is when his awareness of his lack of self-knowledge emerged. As Togashi is so masterful at doing, the lines between good and evil are so blurred and distant that at this point I can't make sense of them. Yet, Meruem is a physical manifestation of arrogance, but he was also born a king. So is it arrogance, or is he just being who he is? And what is good? I would define it as fundamentally any action that is in line with the truth. He is a king and that cannot be argued and therefore acts as one. And Komugi is a peasant and therefore acts as one. So does her humility count as good? It starts becoming difficult to say. Meruem navigates the world trying to understand why he is king and why he is better than everyone else, or maybe if he's not. Here Meruem starts a process of self-understanding. His encounter with Komugi also shows him that there are powers other than his own that other people can surpass him at. If that is the case, then maybe ending the lives of others is not right, because those people have value that he may not be able to provide. This is separate to the inherent value of life, which we are all aware of, but this is a gradual process of Meruem learning about life. Now this relates back to my definition of good, which is acting in accordance with the truth. Meruem realizes that he is not the best at everything, and there is value and worth to be provided outside of strength. Therefore, by taking it away, you are committing wrong. Up until this point, his actions were committed in ignorance of these facts, so it was evil, but not necessarily intentional evil. Proof becomes wary while the king is relaying this information to the royal guards. Afraid that the king has become regretful of his actions, he thinks to himself that it is beneath the king to feel regret, but from his words, it becomes clear that the truth is quite the opposite. Komugi's entire body was glowing. She has experienced an awakening. She will now become much stronger, although only at gungi. After meeting Komugi, I've learned that strength can manifest in different ways. For example, during our trip here, I killed a child. Perhaps that child had the potential to surpass me in a certain field, yet I extinguished that potential. I extinguished it for no real reason. I am king. I took a life for no reason at all. What tremendous strength I must possess. I appear with no warning, to rob countless beings of their inferior strength, to crush, to destroy. That is my power. Brute force is the strongest power in this world. Meruem notes that he may not be the best at everything, and at first, this stumps him, as how can he claim to be the king if he isn't the ultimate being? But then he processes this information differently. He notes that even though there are multiple metrics of human performance, those talents mean nothing in the face of his strength. What does it matter if someone surpasses him at anything, if he can decide to take their life when he feels like it? His initial self-doubt at the new knowledge he received transforms back to self-assurance that he is truly the king. When walking by himself right after the scene, he says, and I quote, "Yes, My power is the strongest that exists. All other power means nothing in the face of my own. They are as dust in the wind. Komugi, that female, is no different. Her skill was in gungi, a simple board game. I could turn her into no more than a source of meat with a barest touch. So her life depends on my mood. If I change my mind, I can immediately kill her. Then why am I so hesitant? My goal was to kill time while waiting for the selection. The selection is tomorrow. Haven't I had enough? Meruem was recently born into the world as king. Therefore, the first stage of his development makes sense. He wants to test if he is truly worthy of being king. And he does this by experimenting with reality, putting himself in different situations to get feedback on the truth. This included killing people, such as the leader of the country they were in, and also what at first would seem the most trivial of his endeavors, but as we know, went to shape the majority of his development, which was playing simple board games. At this point, he believes he has proven his status as king. He can now get rid of Komugi and no longer needs to waste time playing the board games. However, Meruem had yet again miscalculated his understanding of the world. There's another crucial aspect of life that he was not even aware of, and that aspect is human connection and emotion, which is another thread that ties the world and is accounted for when making decisions other than power. And as we saw, he again questions himself. He is king, but then why is he so hesitant to kill this random girl? He'd done it before without feeling anything. Why is it different this time? He then walks into the room Komugi is in, and an interesting dialogue unfolds after he finds her being attacked by a bird. Why did you not call for help? Here and here, you're covered in blood. Damn, I don't believe it. She's such a fragile creature. Because it's still early, I don't want to bother anyone else. You're not bothering anyone. You're an important guest. What am I? Didn't I come here to kill her? Why do you cry? Why can't I do it? No one's ever been this nice to me. What is this creature? What do I want with her? Meruem finds himself connected to another person, caring for another being he believes to be inferior to him, and a physically fragile person for that matter. The complete opposite of what he believes to be a person of worth and value. His emotion again acts as feedback which he uses to better understand himself. Meruem awakens to a whole nother part of himself and the world of human ties, connection, love, and morality. The reasons why the human world is not a complete free-for-all or survival of the fittest, where the strong simply decimate the weak. Just when he thought he had figured it out, Meruem is launched into yet another identity crisis. I am the king, but who am I? Why was I brought into this world? A nameless king in a borrowed castle. My subjects are mindless puppets. If this is the fate the heavens have granted me, I have no doubt that I shall be slowly bored to death. In his interaction with Netero preceding the fight, we learn a lot about his newly formed ideology. Meruem proclaims his intent to use power and terror to the extent necessary to develop a world where inequality is eradicated. He states that he has now understood that his power should be used to protect the weak, who are worthy of being kept alive. He therefore states that he has no interest in fighting Netero, who he can tell is one of those worthy of being kept alive. Netero is worried after learning the king's inner workings. To himself, he notes that the king is wavering between human and ant, and that the two sides are incompatible. The king is undergoing an internal crisis. This raises an interesting question. Why did this occur? If he is an ant and using Netero's intel, it is not in the nature of an ant to develop these philosophies. Why did the king develop them? Maybe his interaction with Komugi after noticing the notable virtues this blind girl possessed sparked this. Or maybe because the ants were never meant to develop as much as they did in the series. Maybe the mutations that resulted in them developing this consciousness makes this inevitable, as this consciousness is what inherently differentiates humans from other creatures who are simply guided by instinct. Meruem's character continues to evolve rapidly, from manic world domination during his fight with Netero, with slight consideration for the human race, to total eradication of the human race after the fight when he had lost his memory, and finally to surrender and humility in the face of his mortality. As soon as he is reminded of Komugi, we come to find out how deeply he values her, with the visual representation of the relationship being so clearly shown in the series. From this rapid metamorphosis of his character, it becomes clear that Komugi is responsible for the softening of the king's heart, biasing him to his human side, which, as Netero stated, was in conflict with his ant side. The series also directly comments on this when Meruem's heart was swayed back to the destruction of the human race when he had lost his memory, stating that this side was in fact always part of him but had been opposed by his love for Komugi. The king then becomes aware of his imminent death, caused by him having been poisoned by the poor man's rose attack Netero had inflicted on him. If Meruem was only half human before this, then this is the point where his actions fully transformed to heavily favor his human side. Mortality and the eventual facing of death is a certainty all of humanity will face. Therefore, it is a part of life which, whether we know it or not, heavily influences how we view the world. It is part of what makes us human. This is the first time Meruem comes into contact with his mortality and hence his vulnerability. Yes, he is king, but he now understands that his fate is death. The end of life is a truth that everyone must bow down before, from kings to peasants. Anything that can die is by definition vulnerable, and therefore must be humbled by this truth to live a life of no regrets before it's too late. Meruem understands this the second he comes into contact with it, and it becomes obvious in his actions. The virtue of humility manifests in his actions. He spares Melfin, even responding to his disrespect and insolence with kind words, wishing him well on his journey and wishes, and then bowing down before Palm, an inferior ant, to allow him to see Komugi one final time. The king bowing down to one of his subordinates, so that he can spend his dying moments with the person he cared the most for. Now, even his ideas of what a purposeful life consists of change. His encounter with his mortality makes him realize that maybe because life is finite and fleeting, that he should spend it with those he cares most about, to allow himself to enjoy the company of Komugi one final time before his death. Togashi, again proving that he is a master of his craft, has used one of his antagonists to slowly unpack what it means to be human, starting with what life would look like if logic was the only lens that it was inspected under. He slowly unpacks the truth of life onto a character who was born as the ultimate king, one by one, until by the end he had this king kneeling down in humility, revealing that all power in the world means nothing in the face of God, the one who brought life to be, and that life itself is infinitely more complex than we can ever comprehend. Meruem also questions whether his realization of the truth would have caused him to live his life differently. The first time we see the king with a genuine smile across his face is when he gets to see Komugi again, waking her up to play gungi. What's more amazing is that the fact that at the beginning when Komugi had asked Meruem his name, he was stunned to find out that he didn't know his name, and that was one of the reasons that launched him into his development arc. Now in their final time playing gungi, Meruem relays his name to Komugi. This is beautiful symbolism, as it represents that Meruem had found himself and that Komugi was a catalyst for his transformation, and as a result also the person he shared the joy of self-discovery with at the end of his short but eventful journey of life. If you take it at face value, the Chimera Ant arc may seem like it dragged around more than necessary, but only if you urge yourself to look deeper will you come to understand the actual brilliance of this arc, and how it comes full circle to represent the cycle of life. Writing this video has allowed me to fully appreciate the arc for what it is, and has definitely elevated Meruem to the top of my list as one of my favorite antagonists in any series. I hope you had a similar experience with this video and enjoyed me unpacking my perspective on the character of Meruem and the instrumental messages Togashi used his development to portray. Please know that any support shown by liking and commenting on the video, as well as subscribing to the channel, goes a long way in helping me develop the channel and release more quality content for you guys. Hope this video was enjoyed, and I'm looking forward to reading your thoughts in the comment section. Also, as we saw in Meruem's case, emotions are an important source of intel that can prove very beneficial if they are leveraged appropriately. If this interests you, I'm sure you'll enjoy the self-improvement series I've created on the channel, where I explore emotions such as fear and the guiding principles of success in books like The Art of War. Check those videos out. Thank you for watching, and as always, take care.